So of the different sort of female characters that we've talked about, Mary Magdalene, the unnamed woman at the well, I mean, I would hesitate to say that they're all positive, but they're, definitely what we see of them that's negative, a lot has to do with their reception later. Yeah. And you can sort of reread those things. I'm wondering about just like purely negative female characters in the New Testament.
That's a great question. So one I can think of, she has a very small part to play in the Acts of the Apostles. Her name is Sapphira. She and her husband, Ananias, sell their property and they only donate half to the community, the early community in Acts. And then they lie about it. And then Peter knows that they're lying and they're struck dead. Okay, so that's one in which she's portrayed as a villain. There are very few, that besides one other is it. There are widows mentioned in the pastoral epistles in which it seems to be that the writer of the letter is saying only widows who are real widows should be on the list. They need to be, older than such and such age, and they can't be gossiping or lustful and running wild in these ways. So that's the only other negative portrayal. But the big one is, of course, from the book of Revelation, the whore of Babylon. And she's a very problematic and interesting character. I don't know if you want to say a little bit about the symbolism that's being used in that apocalyptic setting in Hebrew Bible and poetry.
Well, I mean, I would actually begin with the Tower of Babel as also kind of like a symbol of, if you're reading the story from like creation all the way through the Pentateuch, of this particular strand of the story that really focuses on how there's something corrupt in human civilization, right? Like, for example, Cain as the farmer is also the first murderer, right? Like that, like domesticated, that civilization which resides in the East, right?
Of course.
Right, is somehow corrupt and bad. And this sort of comes to a head with the Tower of Babel. And so that's already like a sort of symbolism there of, Babylon. And then of course, like in prophetic texts as well, as like the sort of corrupting force.
So she is portrayed, this whore of Babylon, in chapters 17 and 18. She appears, she's sitting on a scarlet beast with several heads, 7 heads and 10 horns. I don't know how they're divided up. And she's dressed in scarlet and purple, and she is holding a goblet that's full of her iniquities and fornications. And then tattooed, or written, it says, across her forehead, and the narrator says, is a mystery, the great mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of whores and of earth's abomination. So that is the way that she's depicted. And the mystery, of course, is who is this woman, right? So what is the answer to that? She's dressed opulently. She's described as committing fornication with the kings of the earth. And so, of course, she is the city of Rome. She's shown as this great imperial power and then mocked because she has all the markings of that imperial power. When she's dressed in royal colors, she also has the gold and the pearls and the opulent luxury of the wealth of Rome and the economic wealth that it's gained from, in this description, fornication with the kings of the earth. So she has all of this. So it's kind of it's a parody of that and of all that wealth, and then showing it as a corrupt power, like you're saying, of civilization considered at its height, right? And then this corrupting power that needs to be overthrown. And so that's one way to read the whore of Babylon. She's destroyed at the end, and it's interesting what happens. So it's this incredibly gendered and violent and sexual way in which she is destroyed. So the beast turns against her, right? And so they say, fallen, fallen is Babylon, and within an hour her destruction is complete. And the beast turns against her, and the kings turn against her, the ones that she had fornicated with. They kill her, and they eat her, and they burn her. And so this is very graphic, violent, sexualized destruction of this woman, which is a great symbol of Rome at the same time. So it also, I think, has echoes to Jezebel. And I think about, so I don't know if you want to say a little bit about that.
I was just thinking about being defenestrated, favorite word, thrown out the window, and like fed to dogs,
yes.
right? I think the concept here of like the woman, and actually I have a student who's writing a dissertation on woman as food, so I'm drawing a lot from her own work. It's really interesting the way in which, I guess I would ask you, because I think about it, there's definitely echoes of Jezebel here, but why is it a female character?
Yes.
Like why is I guess if I were to supply my own answer, it would have something to do with like the demonic feminine, right? That when you have a female character that's, a thinking subject, it veers towards demonization. There's something demonizing about sort of like an independently willed female character. I'm not sure if that's like, maybe that's sort of an extreme perspective, but certainly this idea of the demonic feminine comes in here because like Jezebel, as also sort of thinking subject in the story and with her own will.
Yeah, I don't know. I would think of, in the Greco-Roman aspect of this, of the goddess Roma as representing Rome, and she is a female figure of the city and of its power, but feminized, right? As cities often are. And so, but then here she is corrupted, and she's shown, and maybe in her true form, and so perhaps the goddess as demonized in a particular way. So who she really is, kind of course, in an apocalyptic worldview, we see what that Roma is actually. She is the whore of Babylon. So that would, I didn't think of like in a demonic way, thinking about this particular,
Right, but it's interesting because it's correct to say that, we have this, rich tradition, literary tradition of city laments, right? And of course, in Lamentations, Jerusalem is depicted as a fallen woman, right? And so like the city personified as a woman who's fallen, but it's interesting when like the city sort of like has agency, it sort of like takes it to a whole new level.
Yeah. It's such a problematic text and metaphor that's used over and over again in Hebrew Bible and New Testament in the Whore of Babylon. And there are scholars who had said we should just, I give up. We cannot rescue this metaphor in any way. And then they're also interesting to look at the way scholarship has read her as a courtesan, which exactly. You see that, they want to see her in a particular socioeconomic status of where she is a high class, because she's dressed so beautifully and she has pearls and gold, etc.
Like the opposite of the Proverbs 31 woman.
Exactly. But then there have been other readings which look at the Whore of Babylon and say, no, she's a slave. So first of all, she has a tattoo across her forehead, which is a mark of slavery. So it's very apparent that she's had that tattooed on her head. She's also, as a courtesan, she'd have more agency in terms of who she chose to come into her, right? And so here it seems like all the kings of the earth are able to take advantage of her and at the end destroy her. She's violently destroyed and eaten. And so there are those who would say, this is a brothel slave, right? And so it is, in one hand, imperial power and has all of that mocking and parody of Rome. On the other hand, it's a depiction of a brothel slave, the most subjugated, abused woman possible. And I think we'll find echoes of that also in Hebrew Bible, in which you have a woman being used one way or the other, and especially the most degrading way possible.
I think there's also a kind of like broader question that we could ask, and I wonder what it is that you do in your classes, but there's a question about to what extent are we willing to shape our reading of the text to rescue it? I tend to veer on the side of, these texts actually come from a different culture with a different social structure and different value system that may not cleanly map onto ours. And so the idea of trying to rescue these texts for a kind of like, for whatever kind of like political ideology that you want to have becomes really problematic. This is a perfect example of that issue.
Yeah, and I find readings that try to apologize and find something within a historical context, or some wording that can rescue it or redeem it in some way. That's looking for something in the text. I don't think we can mine out of it, and I think it's something that we bring to the text instead. So
Something that I'd say is that the best that sometimes we can do with a really troubling text is to bear witness to it and to all of the sort of inequalities that its reading might bring to different sort of generations of readers.
Yeah, I agree.